welcome to the Soma Collective Podcast. Rich Roll, amazing to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Delighted to be here. It's an exquisite location that you have here. Very grateful for the opportunity to be here and to talk to you today. Thanks.
It's amazing. I think from all of us at Soma, we're really excited to have you here, to be able to speak to you. I think all of the team, you've definitely had a massive impact on. And I just wanted to share a story with you about the impact that you actually have had on people in real life. So 2018, you did an interview with Paul Shapiro around cultured clean meat. Mm-hmm. And me and a couple of my friends back then used to have this get together on a Sunday we used to call Geek Club. And in Geek Club, one of our friends, Nick McLaughlin, turned up and he said, "Hey, I've come across this podcast with Rich Roll interviewing this guy about clean meat." And so we listened to it and it was like, okay, this is really interesting. And I bought the book, and also my friend bought the book, Tim Noakesmith. And just recently, Tim started a company a couple of years ago. They now have 100 people working for that company called Vow Foods.
Wow.
And they just raised like $80 million to continue to grow the science. So I can really speak from experience that your work and your podcast and the people that you bring and connect together really have an impact. So Tim wanted to say thank you, and I want to say thank you for the work that you did.
I appreciate that. That's super cool.
Mm.
Yeah, that's very meaningful to hear, because in doing what I do, I kind of travel between my house and my studio, and I have the good fortune of having these amazing conversations with all different kinds of people that inspire me in various ways. And then I go home, and then it goes out to the world, and I see a number on a spreadsheet or on a, kind of dashboard. And I realize, oh, this is going out to a lot of people, but it's all very academic and abstract, and it's not until I kind of travel or meet new people, that I get to hear stories like that. And that's really the kind of motivation that keeps me plugged in and excited about this, incredible position that I'm in to do what I do.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you. So I wanted to start with just digging into your story of transformation. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a story that I can relate to as a fellow human being. So a few years ago, or 10 years ago, I was running a startup technology business. The company started, it was growing, it went from zero to quickly growing quite fast. To the outside world, everything was looking great for me. But inside, I was completely broken. A lot of what I was doing with my work, connecting with clients, there was a lot of alcohol involved. I basically spent like 10 years taking people for lunches and dinners. And as a relatively introverted extrovert character, I found like alcohol was something that was very useful, especially when you're supposed to be the host and you're supposed to be entertaining people. But that all come to a head when I basically got pneumonia, and then a couple of months later, I thought I'd been having these chest pains for like a couple of days, and I was going over the Harbour Bridge in Sydney, and I thought I was about to have a heart attack, but that heart attack was actually an anxiety attack. And anyway, I woke up in an ambulance on the Harbour Bridge, and that was the moment for me. That was the kind of like changing moment. But I look back on that point as a real point of transformation for me. If that wouldn't have happened, then we wouldn't have been sat here today at Soma. I wouldn't have met Gary. I wouldn't have gone on this journey. So I wonder, when I listen to your story, I read about your story, is there anything about your struggles with alcohol or the journey that you had to go? Would you actually change it based upon where you're sitting now? Or was that a journey that you feel like you had to go through to be who you are today?
Yeah, I think how you frame your past is a choice that we all have. We can look through the lens of the rearview mirror with regret or shame, or we can look at it with gratitude. And we have a choice to kind of mine meaning out of that experience. And so when I look back, yes, there are moments of pain, and in many ways, my story parallels your own. There are some facts that are a little bit different, but it's remarkably similar. And like yourself, I'm now in a place that I never thought I would be, that I never imagined for myself. I didn't vision board it. And yet it suits me so perfectly well in that I get to engage with my curiosity and my creativity. I get to grow in the process, and I get to give back, which is as much as I could ask, for and support my family, in the meantime, and help other people. And that would not have been possible without all of the chapters of my life leading to it. So from my perspective, there is no other choice than to look at it with gratitude. And part of the recovery process in the 12-step modality is to grow to a point or recover to a point where you don't regret your past or wish to shut the door on it. And that's a feeling of liberation. And it comes through the result of a lot of internal work. And I can't say with utter conviction that there aren't things in my past that I don't regret. There certainly are. It's a work in progress. We're all works in progress. But I would say for the most part, I wouldn't change anything. As painful as some of those chapters were, they were ultimately necessary, stepping stones on the path to, being where I am today. And I would surmise that you would respond the same.
Yeah, I would. And it's interesting hearing you talk, identifying with some of the shame in the past has been a hard thing for me. And so one of the things that I've found at times challenging with Soma is this kind of almost like imposter syndrome, being around this place of healing, this place of consciousness, still connected somewhat to my kind of past self. And it's been interesting kind of going through that process. And Soma, actually building Soma and actually creating Soma has probably been as much of a transformation for me than anyone actually who comes to Soma and actually does a retreat, because it's forced me to actually go through that journey as well and kind of relate to that.
And the shame emanates from where? Where does that piece sit?
I think it was just my behavior, really, just behavior. So there was stuff that there was probably people that I hurt in my life that were close to me, and just decisions that, looking back, they were the right decisions to make, but the way I went about those decisions was probably negative and
right.
impactful on people.
And so that's contributing to the imposter syndrome or the sense of unworthiness when you walk these grounds and look around. But you realize, of course, at least intellectually, that this place doesn't exist without your specific skill set, which is a skill set that your partners don't have.
Yeah.
And they're flawed in their own ways,
yeah.
right? So you come here, like everybody, with our imperfections, and you apply your experience and your knowledge in a certain way to try to do something good. And you've certainly created that and more. And it's interesting that sentiment still resides in the back of your head, that sense of should I really be here? All of that. And that's something I relate to myself deeply, like that imposter syndrome or feeling like they're going to find out that I don't know what I'm talking about, even though I've been doing this thing for 10 years, which is insanity, right? And I think it stems from this pressure that we put on ourselves to sort of live at a level of perfection that isn't possible. And it's part of the engine that drove you towards success in business.
Yeah.
And it's part of the ambition that has allowed this podcast my podcast to kind of grow to a certain point where I get to impact all of these people. But it's also ultimately the Achilles heel that keeps us from being more self-actualized, comfortable in our own skin, grateful, feeling like the love that we receive and that we get is not conditional and does not need to be earned, but just is because we are here.
Yeah, definitely. As I, has been more involved. So when Gary and I first started the Soma journey, Gary was the teacher, I was the student, I was on the path. And as we've gone through this journey, I brought these business skills, but I've also started doing more teaching and on the retreats, and just that step into becoming the teacher and sharing that knowledge. There was a big question around authenticity, around that. And I feel like I'm getting to a place now where I just make a kind of mental check to ensure that I'm being authentic, and anything I'm talking about, I actually truly believe and I actually utilize in my life, rather than, something that I might have read somewhere and sounds interesting, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to just regurgitate out to people.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's very easy to just parrot back, a meditation practice or a lecture about the nature of meditation because there's so many resources out there. You can read it and then rehearse it and then share it. But what part of that is actually resonant with you?
Yeah.
I understand that gap. But I think for you, and you already know this, it's like what Ned Brockman was talking about in the podcast we just did. Like, he's like, I'm not trying to be anyone that I'm not. Like, just be authentically who you are and transparent, but not coming from a place of insecurity. Like, hey, you're here for me to teach you, but I don't really know what I'm talking about. And like, you shouldn't really listen to me.
Yeah. It's finding that balance of authentic where you do actually have these life experiences. You've built multiple businesses and you've been through some challenges. And so you have a message to share as well.
Yeah. And that's a valuable experience that I'm sure many people can learn from. Yeah. And you can share that through the lens of your experience in meditation in a way that provides people with practical tools for better living.
So you touched upon your essentially the competitive nature in yourself, and so I just want to take a couple of steps back and go back to your earlier life. So how much do you think your training as a collegiate swimmer and just that drive to actually, to actually be able to perform at that level, you have to have that desire, that focus, almost that obsession to be successful. How much of that is in later life, is that a kind of a blessing or a curse? Do you think that was part of the addiction and part of the problem?
Sure. It's all of those things. It's a blessing. It's a curse. It's an aspect of addiction. It was also a healthy survival impulse. I think early on, my competitive instincts derived from a desire to belong and to be loved. I grew up in a household that was very achievement oriented, specifically when it came to academics and education. And despite my parents being very loving and doing the best that they could, and I love them to death and our relationship is great today, it was that situation where you just, no matter what you did, you just couldn't quite get there. You couldn't quite get what you were looking for, which just pushed me harder and harder and harder. And I was, like yourself, an introverted extrovert when I needed to be, but really kind of an insulated, lonely kid who struggled to make friends and didn't know where I fit in. And swimming was like this vehicle that I could use to feel like I was part of something that was bigger than myself, where I could distinguish myself, where I learned how to set a goal and achieve a goal and really become like special in the hopes that my achievements in that world would secure me the love and the approval that I was seeking. And on some level it worked, and on some level it didn't, but that got imprinted into my DNA and has been part and parcel of who I am. And it has compelled me to achieve many things in my life, but it has also been this enemy that has often led me astray. And now at 56, it's about making peace with who I am, understanding that love and belonging need not be conditional, and despite having like a natural inclination towards ambition, trying to find a healthy peace with that, wherein like what I get to do every day is approached not from a perspective of lack or why is this guy higher on the charts than I am? He's an idiot, all of that. Or, we could charge more for advertising, just like, how cool is it that I get to do this? Like, what a gift. And every day that I get to get up and do it is blessing. And it doesn't really need to be anything more than that. And my job is to be of service. And my ambition should be directed not at growth, but at how can I be a better servant in a way that is of the most material and lasting way for the people who are already interested in what I have to share.
Yeah. How much do you think that you mentioned that your upbringing, like how much do you think that drives that competitive nature? How much do you think is it? Do you think there's a genetic element to like competitiveness, or do you think it's all the culture within the house? Because I can relate, right? By the time I was 10, I was a black belt in Shotokan karate. I was like competing, winning all these tournaments. I was playing rugby. Like I was compete, like win, and that's how I got felt like I was getting the love. But I feel like intrinsically in me, like if I look at my dad, and he's quite a sporty person. Like I wonder how much of like competitiveness and like drive and that sort of desire is driven by like the culture versus like a genetic imprint in you.
Yeah, I think that we're all born with a certain kind of motor. And I say this as a father of 4 kids who has been able to witness like, what these kids are like at a very young age. And it's clear that, some of them are intrinsically motivated immediately and they're just getting after it. They're on the hustle, and other ones, not as important to them.
Yeah.
I think that's a nature aspect that has to do with genetics or, past lifetime stuff or, however, kind of metaphysical you want to go down that road. But I think it's when that predisposition meets opportunity. And when you're a young person, like you're in karate, you fall into this thing, you have a natural ability for it. You're immediately being rewarded for it very quickly. And of course, that's going to be like attractive. So you're going to say, well, I'm going to do this more, or like, this is working for me. I'm getting all this validation and I feel good about myself and other people think it's cool. And so of course you're going to invest yourself more in that. I mean, that's what happened to me. But I think in my case, deep down on a very unconscious level, I saw an opportunity to distinguish myself outside of my family of origin. And it was almost like an escape hatch that could take me to a different place and give me the ability to stand on my own 2 feet outside of what I was seeking within the home. But that comes later. So I think, to answer your question, it's both, like everything.
And so we touched upon this kind of introverted extrovert character. So for me personally, having that kind of balance where I'm happy being by myself and kind of being closed off to the world, but also be very driven as well to kind of perform. I found in the world of work that I was actually in technology and media, you kind of have to be the biggest person in the room sometimes. And sometimes when you're not on, for me, like alcohol was a really good accessible way to become that personality. I heard that you referred to like alcohol as almost like the first time you had it was like a warm blanket being like wrapped around you. Like how much of alcohol for you was the introverted nature versus something else? Yeah,
I mean, certainly that's a piece of it. I would say that I try to avoid spending too much time trying to understand why I became an alcoholic because it's actually not, an investment of time that provides a lot of dividends in terms of how to live now. It's like, this is another thing that you kind of learn in 12-step in that modality of recovery. Like, you're an alcoholic. Okay, well, is it your parents? Was it your genetics? Was it this trauma that happened to you as a kid? Like, maybe, like you can chase that for the rest of your life. But ultimately it's like, I want to know how to keep my addiction at bay today and manage my emotional state and live a sober life. And I have tools for that have nothing to do with why I am an alcoholic. But to answer your question, I think, yes, being somebody who didn't feel comfortable in their own skin is an introverted person. That person, when introduced to alcohol, not everybody, but for some people, that's going to be a match made in heaven because it will allow you to become more of an extrovert, to feel, in a false sense, more comfortable in your own skin. And as if you can be the charming person of your aspirations that meets the needs of the social situation in which you're in, right? But beneath that is somebody who's deeply insecure about just being who they are. So in a sense, I would suspect that you going into those social settings where you have to make a sale or make it, whatever it is that you're trying to do when you take these people out, in a business context, underneath that is a sense that, well, if I'm just me, it's all going to go badly because they're going to see that like I can't convince them of this thing, or I can't crack the joke or be charming, and they're not going to like me. And then this deal that I'm trying to seal is going to go away. So that's the fear, the insecurity, right? But if I take this substance, then I can be that person that I think that they want me to be. But the lie is that you think that if you're just you, that you are not enough, right? And that lie can become very pervasive. And, in my case, was one that I doubled down on for a long time. And, took me to where it took me until it didn't.
Yeah. So in that journey, there was where was the kind of rock bottom for you, where you hit that?
So, yeah, I was a career alcoholic for many years, and my kind of adventures in alcoholism are pretty boilerplate. Like there was a lot of chaos, and I hurt a lot of people, and some real dark moments, but pretty garden variety for anybody who's an alcoholic. Like it wasn't super rock and roll and all of that. It wasn't romantic. It was just kind of sad and pathetic and lonely. The end really was sealed with a marriage that went sideways on the day of the wedding and ended on the honeymoon itself. And that was the last time I saw that person. It was it's a long story, but it was an incredibly painful experience in which everybody I cared about and loved was assembled in one place to watch this event go down, and it all went horribly awry and ended. And it was something that I felt deeply, deeply ashamed of and guilty and wounded and all of the like. I was 31 at the time. And it was so emotionally devastating that I had to drink because I couldn't fathom processing the painful emotions in the wake of that. So that was really the nadir, like that was really the bottom, but that's not the day that I decided to go to treatment. That came many months later until I realized like I had no other options. Finally was willing to, despite flirting with AA and trying to get sober and having it not really work, realizing that I'd never really given it a real go and that my life was on the line, and just had that sort of crack of willingness one morning and said, today's the day, and kind of took action on that immediately.
So you went into rehab, you spent the 100 days in rehab. There was a starting transformation there. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, which I think about a lot, specific to the 12 steps, is just the connection to the higher power. That, in multiple steps, there is this need or this belief to the higher power. I guess my question is, for someone who comes across as quite an analytical person, you're a trained lawyer who is trained to be skeptical, how did you manage to create that connection?
It was created initially out of a place of desperation and willingness. Like, you're right, I went to treatment, and I am a very kind of, rationalistic human being. And that was my introduction to spiritual principles and tenets for living. It first came in the form of a question. The question being, the counselor asking me, Rich, are you a spiritual being having a human experience, or a human being having a spiritual experience? And me responding, I don't fucking know what that question means, let alone have any sense of how to answer it. But because I was so broken, and because I was so convinced that my way of living was no longer tenable and was clearly not working, it disabused me of this idea of solving the problem with the intellect that had created it. And I think that created a portal in which I was receptive to spiritual ideas that were new to me at the time. And, I look back on that as an inflection point, but now very clearly understanding that, recovery is spiritual. And I know that the higher power thing turns a lot of people off who might be flirting with getting sober. And that's a whole other podcast perhaps, but I can tell you that for me, it is fundamentally rooting myself in a spiritual perspective of life and its meaning, that has been the salvation that created the foundation for pursuing a new life and having the faith to weather obstacles during the course of trying to construct that new life that has, led me to today where I get to sit and talk to you.
Yeah, it's a big topic. It's something that I've sat with a long time. I grew up in, a Catholic family in the northwest of England, working class background. Like, I definitely like the word spirituality. I mean, Gary did a podcast like, why does the word spirituality make me cringe?
Yeah.
And so we're digging into that, but it's something that I've always tried to dig into. And I think the place that I've come to now, it's when I forget about the full word spirituality and just think about spirit and like, what does spirit mean? And what is the connection to spirit and my like inner essence in spirit? I can connect to that a lot more, I think, than there's something about that, just the word spirituality that just has so many negative connotations.
Well, there's a lot of baggage with it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of costuming that goes along with it. We're in Byron Bay. I'll walk down the street and you can see the costumes and the kind of ephemera that circles around a person who would identify themselves as spiritual. And that's not even getting into the dogmatic aspects of what it is they actually believe or don't believe. And so certainly, there's negative kind of connotations and some baggage that comes along with that. But if you can push past that and, like you said, focus on spirit, and by that, I would suggest to somebody who's listening or watching that you just turn inwards, and from a meditation perspective, start to pay attention to the experience of stillness, to the arising of thoughts and the dissipation of thoughts, to become that observer of your own experience. And in that silence will emerge the pure impulse of the instinctual kind of authentic self within, yearning to be expressed. And for me, meditation has been an integral part in trying to not only hear and identify that impulse and that voice, but try to make it manifest. And that's a deeply spiritual practice that has nothing to do with your conception of higher power or anything. And I think it's freely available to all of us.
Yeah, that's the thing that I always, today I think about as well, because I think about Buddhism, for example, the teachings of the Buddha, like the framework and the tools there's nothing really connected to like a higher power. In fact, it's quite the antithesis to that. And I quite like that framework, the fact that there's a set of tools that you can follow and there's a process, and then you follow these tools and there's an outcome.
Sure.
It
has nothing to do. Yeah. It has no conceptual opinion about the nature of any kind of higher authority whatsoever. And it even like belies the notion of the observer, because it's about moving past the dualistic idea of the self and the observer of the self, to just that, space of being, of pure consciousness.
So how were you introduced to meditation? Did you come into a teacher, or did you find it through the 12 steps? Like, what was the process?
It is one of the steps in the 12 steps, although I would say that it probably isn't given its proper due in that kind of modality. So that was my first introduction to it. And then in the wake of that treatment experience and moving back to Los Angeles and trying to integrate back into my life, I started going to yoga very diligently. And although that wasn't a meditation practice per se, the pradasana at the end of the practice is meditative, or the sort of idea that all the yoga poses, it's not a athletic class. It's like the yoga poses have a purpose, which is to prepare you for a meditative state at the end, right? The body is being prepared for that period of stillness at the end. So that was the kind of like the second phase of exploring it. And that led to a very spotty flirtation with meditation over many years, not many years, a handful of years. And then I started seeking out teachers. I had started the podcast. I think the first meditation teacher that I had on my podcast was Charlie Knowles.
Okay.
And in fact, I had attended an introduction to Vedic meditation that was hosted by Tom Knowles in Los Angeles several years prior to that.
Yeah.
And I didn't end up going through with it, but I had familiarity with that. And then over the years, becoming more interested and being more consistent with the practice, exploring different modalities. And a lot of it is using various apps. I've never sat retreats or, gone away for a 10-day silent Vipassana or anything like that. So although I have experience with meditation and I've certainly prioritized and deepened my connection with it, and this visit here actually has been part of the reason I was coming here, is to really, emphasize that in my life. And that's already been an amazing experience. I'm not somebody who's been doing it every single day without fail for 10 years.
Do you have a daily practice?
Yeah. I do.
Yeah.
There are days that I don't do it. I didn't do it this morning because I woke up and I had to hustle up here this morning. I woke up too late. It's just life intervenes. Which is something I think we're going to talk a little bit about, like flexibility and fluidity with how you're living. But I am more convinced than ever of its of the mandatory nature of having a commitment to a real legitimate meditation practice in my life. I've experienced the benefits of it, and I'm looking forward to learning more. I wouldn't say I'm a beginner, but I'm certainly not advanced. I'm like on the sort of moving out of the beginner phase into the more
like a blue belt in
phase.
jiu-jitsu. You've
Maybe
got the skill,
something
you've
like
learned
that.
the skills.
Yeah. Which is like, just to even say that is so anti-meditation, right? Like, it's so the competitive, like, where am I in the pecking order of meditators, That's how, I just pulled myself down a peg to baseline beginner for making that terrible statement.
Yeah. Well, on a journey. 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. So how did you go from this nadir in a clinic to running ultra marathons? And for some of the listeners who don't know what an ultra marathon is, can you tell them what it is and how you made that step?
An ultra marathon is technically any running distance longer than a marathon. In my case, I've specialized in ultra distance triathlons, like double Ironman distance triathlons, multi-day, multi-sport events, swim run, swim bike run, et cetera, and distinguished myself in that world throughout my mid-40s. But the leap from nadir to that, is a very nonlinear, messy one, and certainly not one that I scripted for myself. For the better part of a decade after getting out of treatment, my priority was building a foundation of sobriety and repairing the wreckage of my drinking and using to become a responsible member of society again, and kind of become that person of promise that I was before drinking interfered with that. Because when I was 18, I really, I had a lot of potential as a young person that I squandered, and a lot of shame and guilt about that. And so I kind of applied in an addictive way that competitive nature to my profession, to all aspects of my life, such that by the time I was about to turn 40, I had checked all those boxes and achieved many of those things.
Did you stay as a lawyer?
I was a lawyer.
You were still a
yeah,
lawyer
I was a
at that
lawyer.
point?
Yeah, I was a lawyer, chasing that partnership track and all that kind of nonsense. And was starting to have this existential crisis about how I was living was starting to percolate out of my unconscious, because I wasn't doing it for myself or because it was, the blueprint of my, higher nature. I was doing it because I was still chasing approval, validation from my parents, that conditional sense of love, social expectations. Like, this is like, oh, you were a drunk mess. Well, now you have to become this partner in this law firm to show everybody that you're okay now, right? So beneath that is a deep sense of not being okay with myself, or not feeling like I had the entitlement to really figure out what I wanted out of life, or what perhaps was unique to me that was yearning to be expressed. Like, that was not part of my vernacular or my thinking at the time. So much like yourself, I had to, crash that car into a wall, the kind of traditional, notion of success. And that just happened to collide, also similar with your story, with a health scare, chest pains and the like, and heart disease runs in my family. And my grandfather passed away from a heart attack at a young age, and I was named after him, and he was a swimmer. Like, a lot of kind of mystical parallels. And that was another bottom, much like the bottom when I decided to get sober, where I realized not only that I needed to change how I was living, but I had that willingness. There's a big difference between needing to change and wanting to change, and what the nature of that wanting to change actually looks like. Like, how willing are you? What are you willing to do? And I felt that resurgence of willingness, and it was familiar because it had visited me 10 years prior. And by acting on it, I had transformed my life in ways I couldn't imagine. And I was like, it's happening again. Like, I have these other areas of my life that are in dire need of redress, that I've been in denial over, that I've been repressing and denying until that untenable point where it all comes spilling out, right? In your case, you end up with an anxiety attack and in an ambulance. Mine wasn't quite that severe, but enough to wake me up and to get me to start changing my lifestyle habits. And, it wasn't an overnight thing, but through a variety of experiments with diet and nutrition, ended up stumbling onto this plant-based diet thing, which really agreed with me and gave me this resurgence of vitality and encouraged me to move my body again. And that led to, me going out for a jog, and a couple of weeks later, the jog becoming longer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, recovering really quickly, feeling incredible in my body, having the energy of a teenager that I hadn't experienced in many, many years, and really brought joy back into my life. And I progressed very quickly in the running, and felt that I had unfinished business as an athlete because alcoholism had destroyed my swimming career. I think that was part of it. And at 40, it's like you're having this, midlife crisis. What is my life? I need to do an Ironman, all that kind of bullshit if I'm being honest, that was part of it too. And I stumbled into reading about this world of ultra endurance that I hadn't heard about. I think Dean Karnazes' book, Ultra Marathon Man, had come out, but there wasn't a lot of, it's not like it is now. It was sort of this weird subculture, and this race called Ultraman that I'd never heard of. And it was like a light switch getting flicked. And I just knew I'm going to do that race. It was like this deep intuitive knowing that that race, not only was I going to do it, but it was going to be significant in my life. And that's really, reality bore that out for me over time, and was able to end up going and doing a bunch of these crazy races and doing some stuff no one had ever done before, which led to a bunch of media attention, because not only was I a middle-aged lawyer in my mid-40s who kind of came off the couch. Yes, I had this background as a swimmer, but it had been many years since I'd done anything physical or athletic, and was kind of distinguishing myself in a meaningful way in that world, but also doing it on a plant-based diet. And there's a lot of vegan athletes now, and Game Changers, and all these documentaries and stuff like that. It's a much more mainstream thing than it was back in 2008, 2009. So people were curious about that. And that really led to me getting this book deal. And, one thing, led to another. And, just by literally showing up and trying to be in my best self, that has been the space in which all the miracles were strung together to, allow me to do what I get to do today. But again, it wasn't like when you're like, how did you get from here to here? It's like, well, I got out the whiteboard and I made, I mapped it out and I was like, I'm going to do this and then this is going to happen and then this is going to happen.
I mean,
it was the antithesis of that.
Yeah. So it was a jagged line. Was there any point where you were trying to envision that, or were you just literally following your curiosity, connecting to the
It's
next
a little bit
step?
of both, of course. Yeah. Like, suddenly, like, I'm doing these races and I was really doing them as a spiritual practice. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to get on a podium. It was, I don't know what to do with my life. I have this instinct that is compelling me to move and I'm finding joy in that. And for the first time in my life, I'm going to listen to that. I'm not going to repress it because I'm supposed to be riding an elevator and wearing a suit every day. Yeah. I'm actually going to do that thing that makes me happy. Yeah. And I don't give a shit if people criticize me or don't understand what I'm doing. Like, that was a big deal for me. And then the practice of training for these races and participating in them was really it's sort of like going into the cave as a meditator. Like, I needed to figure out who I was and who I wanted to be. I didn't have answers to any of those questions. And there's something about, going out for an all-day run or like being on my bike all day in that state of kind of low-grade exertion where your heart rate is elevated and you're connected with your breath, where you feel deeply integrated with yourself. And it gave me space, I guess is what I'm saying. It wasn't a formal meditation practice. I would never create a parallel between like what real meditation is and what people would call active meditation. But there was space that I needed to inhabit and explore in order to resolve this existential crisis. And it served me well in that regard. And the fact that I did well in those events and stuff like that is almost just a byproduct of the impulse to get into it in the first place. And then when the media attention started, I realized like I was being presented with an opportunity to perhaps create the foundation for a new life, not knowing what that new life meant. But when CNN was like, we want to come to your house and interview you, it was like, that's not a normal thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, why is this happening to me? What makes sense about this? Like, what is it about this experience that I could, use to figure out like how to get out of being a lawyer and doing something else that would support my family, honestly. So of course that was part of it. Yeah.
Why do you think it had to be you when you look back at it now? Like, why you? What was the specific skills that you had? What was the experience, or is it just all this coming together at the same time?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And again, that's another one of those things where it's like, is it like, how productive is it to ask yourself that? I don't know. I mean, it's luck, it's timing, it's my willingness to like, grab those reins when they were thrown to me and try to make something out of it. I mean, I'm not, I did work very hard to like create all of this and take those little opportunities and try to grow them. I'm the wrong person to ask why.
It's like compounding luck,
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, looking back, everything's always 2020 in the rear view, right? Everybody can identify their hero's journey, when you look through the rearview mirror. But when you're in it, and I'm sure you know this, it's not like that at all. Like, it's utterly confusing and it's a massive test of faith. Like, there was gigantic financial challenges that my wife and I went through, and we were really like forced to our knees and had to really get clear on faith, right? Because it's like what we were trying to do, or what the way in which we were approaching it, didn't make any logical sense. And there were plenty of people saying, what are you doing? Like, people telling Julie, like, what is your husband doing? Like, we were broke, and I was like training for these races, and like, we have kids and a mortgage that I couldn't pay, which was very emasculating and confusing. And so Now everyone's like, oh, it's so great. We always believed in you. I was like, I can tell you when this was happening, it all looked like lunacy and it didn't make sense at all. And I was I was terrified, that I was making a fatal mistake that was harming other people that I cared about. And in the short run, it did. Like we suffered as a family. And I think what we endured would have exploded most marriages. And I'm grateful that because Julie has the fortitude of, of a goddess, like it brought us closer together. Like she was really the strength and the glue that when my faith faltered about what we were doing, she was able to, have the conviction to keep us together and get to the next day.
Yeah. I mean, that's with any entrepreneur's journey, any creator's journey that goes on that path, those initial couple of years while you're trying to build something and grasp it, you give up a lot. For me, I had a cushy little number at Microsoft where I was getting paid a lot of money for how old I was, and then to jump out of that and just to kind of essentially go broke for a couple of years. It's hard, and this is why, like, any entrepreneurs out there, anyone who takes that jump or whatever they're doing, whether they become a musician or an athlete who takes that jump, I've just got the ultimate kind of respect for them, because it is hard. It is hard to make those jump, and there's sacrifices that people need to make, and it's painful, like, along the way. And
it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
I think there's also this culture now where if you don't quit your job and do your startup, there's something wrong with you. And I just don't think that everyone is cut out for it. I never thought of myself as a risk taker or an entrepreneur. I was raised to be very much a safety seeker, and so many of the decisions that I've made were premised upon that, only to discover that all the security and the safety that I was pursuing was an illusion and wasn't making me feel safe or secure at all. And it was only in the letting go of all of that and incurring, a huge degree of risk that I was able to kind of like discover the innate kind of entrepreneur that had been there the whole time, but never had permission to like raise his hand.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm trying to do at the moment is almost the antithesis of what you just said, because I'm trying to almost create a framework around this process of like connecting to a vision, going on the journey, being agile in the process, and bending but not breaking. And because we're working with a lot of entrepreneurs or people who might be going on that journey. In the back of my mind as well, I've also got two young daughters where I'm trying to distill these experiences that I've had as a person and the knowledge that I have to almost share that knowledge and those frameworks with them. For you, like, what are some of the big questions or some of the big kind of foundations that you think would be helpful for people as they're either on the journey or they're thinking about transitioning onto a new journey?
The fundamental things being like how to weather obstacles, or which decision to make, or what aspect of that specifically?
I feel like just connecting to the purpose. Like, you seem to be someone who is fully connected to the purpose that they're on, that like the journey that they're on. Like, how do you go through that process to connect to that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's tricky. I think when you bring up purpose, a lot of people get derailed because they don't know what their purpose is. And they think that they need to figure that out or define it for themselves before they can actually take any action. And I can tell you, I didn't know what my purpose was. I don't know that I don't know that I still know what it is. I think in my case, and I try not to give advice about this and keep it to like sharing my experience, but in my case, purpose became manifest as the result of the actions that I was undertaking. And those actions were an effort to align my behavior with those, quiet instinctual impulses. And the more that I did that in a way where I could trust those impulses, that led me towards decisions and actions and outcomes that ultimately, over a very long period of time, from which emerged a sense of purpose, right? So like I always say, mood follows action, like action first, everything else follows from that. I think what gets challenging here is learning how to trust and understand what that, for lack of a better word, higher self is trying to tell you. When I was a practicing alcoholic, all of those impulses telling me do this, do that, very unreliable. Generally the wrong thing to do, the bad decision, right? And it took me a very long time before I could trust that again. And what happened during that very long period of time was a lot of work, a lot of interior work. Obviously sobriety and everything that gets packed into that, but a lot of therapy, a lot of meditation, all of these tools. And the modality is less important than the commitment to exploring that for yourself. But the point being, you have to arrive at a point where you're like, okay, this higher self that I'm trying to understand, that's trying to connect with me, that I can hear more clearly when I'm in that place of silence, that is a trusted voice. That is a voice that I can listen to and that I can act on. If you do that prematurely, probably not going to drive you in the right direction. So you have to remove the distractions and the addictive tendencies and all of the filters, the Instagram filters on that spotlight down there, so that you're seeing it and hearing it and understanding it clearly. And then it's about taking tiny actions based upon that, dipping your toe in the water. How did that feel? This feels good. I think I feel more myself when I'm doing this than when I'm doing that, and be your own A/B tester of your life experience, right? And in a kind of decision tree way, as a coder, as a technology guy, right? Like, okay, that doesn't work. Like, well, let's do this, and then I think you find yourself in the doing, and then along the way, the experiences that you accumulate and the wisdom that starts to augur, it becomes about figuring out a way of giving that back or sharing it. And that doesn't have to happen in a professional context, but in some aspect of your life, how are you returning the gifts that have been given to you? And I think that's, if you're really stuck on purpose, that's the best way to find some kind of clarity around that.
Yeah. What I was hearing there is that the fact that you had to go through this huge analytical journey of self-inquiry, you were able to break things down, you explore things, which I think for people trying to connect to a vision is actually incredibly important. So doing almost a detailed analysis of who they are, why they are, what are their pain points, what is their empathy points, what are their passion points, what are their fears, and really kind of breaking that out. But then when you go through that, you kind of need to get out of your head as well and connect to your heart and connect to the passion. But yeah, it's interesting you say the hardest thing generally for people is once they have that analysis is to actually take action. A lot of people don't take that step, and that is the big thing. And for some people that might be part of that analysis because they have limiting beliefs and they have self-doubt and just a lack of belief on why they can actually take those actions, or sometimes they just make it too big. Yeah. And you look at what you've built now, and if you would have looked back 10 years ago, it would be hard for you to imagine what you've actually built. Same with me with the technology company, or with Soma today. It's hard to imagine 15 years ago the scale of some of the things, but the reality of it is it's tiny actions that are recalibrated over time actually build things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And those tiny actions have to incrementally increase the level of discomfort that you're willing to tolerate. So if you're somebody who feels like you don't have the capacity for growth, that you're not entitled to be happy or to be successful, and the idea of whatever it is, starting your own business or any kind of challenge just feels daunting and impossible, it is about identifying the most digestible, easy to accomplish, slightly uncomfortable thing for you to do, and to begin to do that. And then through the habit of that, you can kind of increase the valence of that discomfort, and then slightly notch up the ceiling of self-possibility. And being engaged with that at a level initially where there's very little risk or vulnerability, and it can be entirely private to you, will slowly plant that seed of self-esteem, because all of those actions are actions on behalf of the self. And those are the type of actions that breed self-esteem. You're just laying tiny little bricks. And the more of those tiny little bricks you lay, one day you're going to lay a bigger brick, and you're going to look back, maybe not a year from then, but maybe 5 years from then, and be astounded at the progress you've made. And I think that and I've said this many times, we talk so much about changes we want to make this year, whether it's a New Year's resolution or whatever. Like, a year from now, I want to be here. 6 months from now, I want to lose 20 pounds or build this business, et cetera. And I think we really over-index on what we're actually capable of in a year, and totally underestimate or under-index on what we can accomplish in a decade. Like, all the things that I've been successful at took 10 years. So that's good news and bad news. It's bad news that it's probably going to take a lot longer than you think, but it's good news in that those tiny little things that you're doing every day actually do matter. And what you think you're capable of, you're probably undershooting that. I don't know. I had one more thought, but I forgot what it was.
Yeah, good thoughts.
Yeah.
So while on this journey, one of the things that we try and think about with Soma is creating agility in people. So they might be under these deep stresses or these challenges, but we want them to be able to bend, but we don't want them to break. So I just want to dig into this. So what have you learned, having done the extreme of human endurance, about bending but not breaking?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great subject matter to explore. It goes to, calibrating the degree of challenges that you're voluntarily inviting into your life, and understanding that if they're too extreme, you're creating an untenable, unsustainable situation. If they're not challenging enough, then you're really not growing, right? You're deluding yourself into thinking that you're doing things that are making you uncomfortable, but they're actually probably keeping you stuck. And an example that I would use in the case of myself is, people, how do you train so hard and do all these hard races? And it's like, actually, that's easy for me. Like, I actually look forward to it. Like, my favorite part of the day is when I have nothing on the calendar. I can get up and get out and go on my bike and like really push myself all day. I love that. Like, that's not something I dread. There's days you don't want to wake up or whatever, it's like, it's not always easy, but actually that's like a highlight of my, so for me, the discomfort or the agility or like the calibration of the difficulties has to come, like, what are the areas like I'm in denial over? Like, what am I not looking at? Like, what is that old story that keeps coming up that spills into my behavior and how I parent my kids, or in my intimacy with my wife, that I've been doing forever and have just decided like it's not a big deal? Like, that's the uncomfort for me. And like, how do I go into that in a way that's uncomfortable, that's not going to implode my life, but is challenging me to make sense of this thing that is clearly dysfunctional in my psychological makeup, that perhaps I could untangle. Like, that's not really something I want to do. Like, I'd rather go ride my bike, or I could go sit in meditation and ignore that.
Rather than.
But
different.
How much more profound would that meditation practice be if I could clear up this noise that continues to infect the quality of my relationships and my daily experience? So my point being that this looks different for everybody, and it requires a level of self-honesty, to understand what it is that really is the most important thing in need of redress. So people will come to me, I want to run a marathon, I want to do an ultra, how do I do it? It's like, why do you want to do that? Mm-hmm. Well, it seems cool. Or like, are you running towards something? Are you running away from something? Yeah. Like a lot of people are very disconnected from the goals that they're setting for themselves. Like it sounds hard, like not that there aren't benefits in doing that under any circumstance, but there's a lot of people who will use those types of things as distractions, because then they can say, look how healthy I am, or look how, look how willing I am to do hard things. But in that scenario, the like choosing to train for the whatever is the easier choice. The more uncomfortable choice would be to go look at that thing that you're like pretending isn't there. That's like metastasizing and like eating away at your insides, but you're like, it's fine. Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question at all, but
no, you answered a big part of it. So understanding what mentally we're aware of and what we're embracing versus kind of running away from a physical perspective, like what are the, because we talk to, for example, a lot of executives who are overworked, overstressed. Yeah. Physically, I think you said you were 41 when you couldn't walk up the stairs, and you're 50 pounds. That we come across a lot of that. Like what are the, like what's been the biggest thing? I know, for example, sleep is something that you've been very passionate about.
I mean, I think in that case, these are individuals who are highly motivated, highly ambitious, very driven, type A, used to having all the answers, know how to create success for themselves, and clearly know how to push themselves. So they're not unfamiliar with what it means to live out of balance and out of your comfort zone. But what happens is that extreme nature of pushing in a professional or a business context becomes second nature. And the real discomfort comes when that person is challenged to slow down. Maybe you should meditate. Maybe you shouldn't eat that and you should eat this. Maybe you should take 45 minutes in the morning to exercise or get into a cold plunge or do, any of these self-help or sort of self-care modalities, or get an extra hour of sleep. Like this notion that you're priding yourself on being able to operate on 4 hours of sleep, it's killing you. Your stress levels are through the roof. Your cholesterol's high. Like all of these markers are indicating that you're a very unhealthy person. And yet the resistance that I'm sure, anybody who comes up here already has crossed through the threshold of like realizing they want to make some changes, but getting that person initially to realize they need to make that change and then to implement any of those changes is much more uncomfortable than for them to just keep doing what they're doing and banging their head against the wall. And how do you get somebody to do that, right?
It's unfortunate that there seems to be sometimes there needs to be a massive pain point for them for that tradition, and that's what I'm almost trying to think through and trying to avoid. Why did you have to have that crash? Why did I have to have that crash to make this transition? How can people, see the warning signs and find that balance without having to feel real pain? And that's a problem for the human psyche.
Yeah. In the addiction context, they say the elevator's going down. It doesn't have to hit the ground. You can actually step off it at any time. It's just that most people need to hit the ground before they're willing to listen. I think one thing that I found helpful in this context is to try to use like the kind of language that will speak to that person. So if somebody's super high performance oriented, top level executive, completely recalcitrant about changing their habits because they are convinced that it is those habits that are credited with making them successful. And if they were to change them, it would threaten the entire operation, right? So there's a lot of fear baked into that. So the languaging, and words are really important to use, is to appeal to that obsession with performance and say, actually, you would be a much more effective. Here's studies that show executives that went from from 6 hours a night of sleep to 8 hours a night of sleep actually raise their revenues like 15% and like all these other markers that like that's their language. They understand that. Like, oh, it's not about me. It's like, oh, I get it now. Like I'll do that, but I'm doing it not for myself. I'm doing it because like I want my company to be more successful. So they're missing the larger point, but at least you get them through the door. Maybe they do it a little bit. They see the result. And then like, oh, hey, I actually feel better. And then they're on their own journey, right? Like that's how it started for me. Changed my diet. Like I didn't feel good in my body. I was worried about my personal health. I was fat. I didn't like what I saw when I looked in the mirror. Like these were vanity concerns predominantly. Yeah. And now my perspective on diet and lifestyle is very different, but that didn't happen overnight. And I think when we lay a template over somebody at the beginning of their journey and say, well, you're doing it for the wrong reason. You're like, you don't get it, or like you're doing it wrong. Like you're just dousing this flicker, this flame that we should instead be fanning, and trusting of the person to like your job is to be an igniter, like get them excited about something and then be like, you're on your own, dude, because ultimately none of it's sustainable unless that person actually develops their own willingness and desire to do it for themselves. And you can't make somebody have that. You can't will that onto another person. They have to, it has to be a self-generated impulse.
Yeah. You must have been able to do a lot of analysis and like benchmarking against your physical health over the last number of years. Have you been able to identify specifically what it is about the plant-based diet that really works specifically for you?
My experience with it from the outset was very positive. Like I said, I had this enhancement in my energy levels and my vitality and my cognition, in my sleep, a reduction in my stress levels. I just felt better, right? And then this is working for me. Let me just try to figure out how to do this better. Then went through this phase where I was pushing my body incredibly hard, and it was responding in kind and performing at a level that I didn't think it was capable of. And now I'm in a different phase of my life where I still go out and train and stuff like that, but I'm not competing. I'm living a much more kind of balanced, normal existence. And I'm 56 now, but I still am able to go out and push my body hard, and it does well. I don't have any trouble building lean muscle mass or getting stronger in the gym. I'm as strong in the gym now as I was when I was 22 in college, and I'm able to go attack hills on my bike and feel fine the next day. I've got some lower back problems, not perfect. Like I'm not like trying to portray myself as some kind of like Superman, but all the while now in my 16th year of eating plant-based, like feeling good, my blood markers are good. And it works for me. Like beyond that, like, I don't know. I mean, I think I would say, I don't want to overstate the case. It's not like eating plant-based is some kind of like miracle panacea. I think the fact that if you're eating plant-based, and by that, I mean whole plant foods close to their natural state, not eating, because it's so easy to be an unhealthy vegan now. You can just eat chips and whatever all day long. If you're eating in that way, you're eating a very nutrient-dense diet that is diverse in its nutrients. It's by and large on the overall a much more anti-inflammatory diet, and most of the chronic ailments that are unnecessarily debilitating and killing people, from heart disease and diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure and all of that, are like metabolic diseases or diseases as a result of chronic inflammation, right? So when you're eating a diet that is like combating that in an effective way, that's going to be productive. And from an athletic context, that's also allowing the body to expedite its repair in between workouts. Because as an athlete, it's not the training that makes you better. It's like the repair that occurs in between your training sessions that actually make you fitter and stronger, et cetera. And if you can shrink that window, then you're going to be able to train harder. You're going to be able to train longer. You're less likely to get injured or get ill. And so when you protract that out over an extended period of time, that's going to translate into pretty substantial gains. And that was my experience. So And that's not to say that perhaps you can eat another way and achieve all of those things. But I think what's unique about eating plant-based for me, as somebody who, again, started it from a perspective of vanity and wanting to lose weight, is that it sort of checks all the boxes. Like, it's a very healthy way to eat. It's, lower in some of the things that are contributing to these chronic lifestyle ailments, lower in saturated fat, et cetera. It is, when done properly, a very kind of much more environmentally sustainable way of eating. And from an ahimsa perspective, it is a lifestyle that's contributing less harm. And so that feels good, and it's kind of weird how nature has rigged it. Like, hey, if you eat these things, like actually all of these things are happening, and without really that much thought on your part. And to me, it feels like, that's the way nature designed it,
Yeah. Are you doing anything specific? So you've obviously got the plant-based diet. Have you, thinking about recovery specifically, is there anything you found with recovery that's worked particularly well for you? Talking to someone who's a 41-year-old trying to do jiu-jitsu with 20-year-olds and recovery. I can relate to it.
It's interesting. Like, when I was your age, I felt like I could just kill it until I was about 51.
Okay.
So it didn't really start, like, a lot of the stuff like started creeping a little bit later. They're like, so you got like some time, but if I was you, there were plenty of things I would have done in my 40s that I didn't do because I just was time crunched. I just wanted to get out and train. So all the pesky functional fitness stuff and like the stretching and like the foam rolling, all of that, like, now I wish I had done it, because I'm paying the price for that. So in terms of recovery practices now, I mean, fundamentally, the most important thing is sleep. There's just nothing that even comes close to that. Like, to the extent that you can prioritize sleep and have a really robust, like, nighttime routine that prepares you for sleep, I think that's super important. And I've gone to great lengths to try to do that. And as you get older, sleep becomes more elusive. And you really do have to, like, endeavor to ensure a good night's sleep more than when you're young. You just pass out all the time. It doesn't work like that the older you get. Sauna and cold plunges have become like a big routine for me.
Do you sauna at night or morning?
I don't have a home sauna yet, so I have to go to a friend's place for that now, but I do have a cold plunge. Yeah. So I've been doing cold plunge and I've got a jacuzzi, so I'll go back and forth with that. So jacuzzi's not quite a sauna. I need to be cold I'll try to end on the cold plunge, even though that's super uncomfortable. Yeah. I know Peter Attia talks about like doing sauna right before he goes to bed, but if I'm overheated, I don't sleep well. That's just me. So I sleep better in a cold environment. So I try to go to bed on the colder side of things, and that seems to work. You're still
sleeping in the tent?
I do. Yeah, I sleep outdoors in the tent.
Yeah.
I have a nice glamping tent now, and I have a mattress. It's like not, it's not like, it's like, Spartan. Like it's actually pretty fucking posh. I'll tell you. Although we've had massive rains, I called home the other day. I was like, is everything like it ruined in the tent? Anyway, but I do so in Southern California where I live, even in the summertime, it goes down to the 40s Fahrenheit at night. It's nice and cool. And it really helps me sleep better at night. So sleep, number one, 100%. Sauna, cold plunge, that kind of stuff. And then there's, you can get into the supplements and all of that. I look at all of that stuff as like a cherry on top. Like most people, they want to hear about the supplements, but they're like, yeah, with the sleep. Like they don't want to, do the actual like thing that will make the most difference. Anyway.
Do you actually track your sleep, or are you?
I do. I've got the Whoop. I'm not wearing the Whoop right now. The Whoop and the Oura Ring and all that kind of stuff.
How accurate do you think they are? Have you done it in a medical setting versus the application?
I haven't. I don't know the answer to that. I think there was a study done recently that compared all of them and said that Whoop was the most reliable of all of them. I do notice that the Whoop and the Oura, like if you compare the data, there's little differences between the two of them. So they're not exactly the same. And I think for me, it's not about like being wed to the minutia of the data. It's more like trends over time. So I try not to let these things like dictate, like I'll look at them, but I try not to like let it invade too much headspace. So you don't want to like wake up in the morning and then you look at it and it's like, it gives you a score before you've even done anything that day. And that score is never 100%.
Yeah.
So it's like, I haven't even started my day yet and I'm at 65.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah.
So sometimes I won't look at it until the end of the day. Like if you have stuff to do that day already, like does it matter? Like you don't.
Yeah, if you're competing that day, I'm not worrying my wife.
Right. So anyway,
yeah,
macro trends, I think it's helpful for.
Yeah. So like leading on to the health span and longevity. So sleep is the magic pill you recommend. Is there anything that you have seen around the health span longevity area that you're curious about at the moment?
Yeah, there's so much emerging science right now in that space. I think the big challenge is parsing reality from fantasy. There's a lot of kind of future tripping going on right now that's fun to kind of track and follow and indulge with. But very little of it offers pragmatic advice about how to live right now. Like maybe in some undetermined future, 5 years from now, you hear about like, the longevity, escape velocity, and like all these, like where we're going to be, the science is going to be able to, for every year you're alive, like they figured out how to extend your life 2 years, or, it's like, well, people are going to start living forever and all. It's cool. And maybe that'll happen and maybe it won't, but like, what can we do now and today? I think there's some interesting stuff going on with pharmacology, with NMN and all of that, but we don't really know how impactful that is.
Do you take NMN?
I have. I'm not right now. Can't say I felt any different, but like, who knows? Are you supposed to feel any different?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I didn't. Yeah, I've just stopped taking it actually. I'm in a world of I'm almost in the world of confusion. I was like on the bandwagon well and truly, and now I'm in this like state of questioning like everything with the whole supplementation around it, and resveratrol, NMN, all of these different supplementations. Yeah,
I really think again those are like the cherry on top. I think the real levers are more practical lifestyle decisions that we make every single day. In addition to sleep, like, are you like, what does your movement practice look like? And by that I don't mean jujitsu or cycling or running or going to the gym. Like, are you just moving gradually and gently throughout the day? What is your relationship with your friends and your family? What does your community look like? Like, how embedded are you with the people that you care about? How lonely are you? Like, how engaged in your life are you? What is your purpose, your ikigai look like? Like all of these blue zones tenets, I think are really practical and applicable, and often things that we've allowed to degrade in our lives. And I think as men also, as we get older, harder to make friends. You have your friends, but then how often do you really see them, and do you talk to them, and like how engaged are you? And we go and we live in cul-de-sacs or kind of out in the country, and we're not living places where we can walk and see people that we know every single day. And the nature of like our faith communities has changed. It used to be everyone would congregate at the church, and irrespective of your perspective on religion, that was a community place in which there was a gathering and everybody felt kind of coherent around an idea or a particular way of life that I think keeps people plugged into their lives and engaged with their lives, that drives longevity in a way that we haven't figured out how to pharmaceutically or surgically or therapeutically yet.
Yeah, community is a big one. It's something we think about with Soma, like things we can do to connect the local community and bring people together outside of organized religion, and just I think it's incredibly important. And as you said, with all the blue zone areas, there's always that deep connection to community there. And
Peter Attia has a new book coming out called Outlive. It's coming out this spring. And I brought it with me on this trip. I haven't read it yet, but I got to read it before I go back. Okay. But it's basically, he's obsessed with longevity, and this is his take on that. And he seems to have a very grounded perspective when it comes to some of the emergent longevity science. He's not as quick to jump on some of this stuff as some of the other people out there.
Yeah. I might end on this question, but considering we're talking about longevity and ultimately talking about one's death, is one's death something you contemplate on, meditate on? Is it something that you use? I know the Stoics with memento mori, and the Buddhists contemplate on it. Is it something that you do as a tool?
I do. I mean, I think that started when I turned, so I'm 56 now. It really started in earnest when I turned 54, because that's the age that my grandfather passed away from a heart attack. Who was also named Richard and was a swimmer, as I mentioned, and all of these things. And so that made death very present. Like, even despite all these lifestyle changes that I had made, like, maybe this is my genetic destiny is just to die like the way that he died and when he died, because even though I lived my life much healthier than I used to, there were many years of living very unhealthy. Like, what is that, doing to me long-term that I can't erase or eradicate? So that realization was initially met with fear. But I think now I'm really at peace with it. I hope that I live a long life, and I want to see, my kids grow old and all that kind of stuff. But it's made me much more present in my daily life and much more appreciative, especially of the little moments, and less concerned with achievement and ambition and things like that. Like, a real profound knowing and appreciation for the fact that, like, this right now is the good time. Like, I'm not doing what I'm doing or living the way that I'm living for some future point where it's all going to be good. Like, what's good is this right now, and like really living in that tactile, emotional reality has been really curative for me, and really helped reconfigure a lot of my priorities and perspectives, and given me clarity about where and how to invest my time in the places where it's most important to me or most in alignment with my values. And also a realization, like, in terms of like being at peace with death, like, I live a life like so beyond anything that almost anybody gets to experience. Like, if I drop dead right now, like, good run. It's like pretty good, like I think I did good, and I'm pretty happy with not legacy, because I don't like that word, but like what I leave behind, or, the not just the work, but like the way that I've made the people that I care about feel, which is like a really important thing to me. It's like, so for me now, it's like, I want to show up and do good work and be of service and deliver the most helpful content that I can through the channels that we have. And after that, it's like, I want to have amazing relationships with my wife and my kids. Like, as my kids get older, like, I want to be the dad that they call when they have a problem and they want to talk to me about it, or the dad that they look forward to coming home to see after they've been away, or something like that. Like, like it's like simple shit, man. It's like, it's not about like building an empire or like, what if this happens or that happens, and this is, what you hear echoed by every, elderly person on their deathbed who has an opportunity to share their regrets and triumphs, before the lights go out. And like, I feel that. And I think it is a reflection of my meditation practice, of that Stoic principle, of, the coincidence of my grandfather's age and all of that have made that all very present to me. And it's improved the quality of my life. It's that thing, like, we're in a culture, we deny death. We pretend it doesn't exist. Like, have you ever seen a dead person?
Most
people haven't. It's like, we have erased it from our experience, and yet it's something that's going to happen to all of us. But in the back of our mind, we're like, yeah, but not me. It's like, somehow I'm going to figure out and run around this thing, even though, like, it's probably not true, but like, maybe I'll figure that out. Like, we don't allow ourselves to connect with this fundamental reality, because we're terrified, and we're in a culture that amplifies this narrative that it's something that we should deny and fear and remove from our experience. And yet when we invite it in and we stare it in the eye, it loses that power. Yeah. And when we can make peace with it, the benefit is an enhanced quality of our limited time of lived experience here.
Yeah, there's a great line from Stephen Batchelor, the Buddhist monk, and the contemplation is, if death is certain and the time of death uncertain, what should I do about it? And it's something that I kind of sit with a lot. It's just like so succinct, but so powerful. So I think on that note, I would say I think you're doing pretty good, and I think you're a great person. And thank you for the inspiration that you've given to me and to many people I know. And keep doing the good thing.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate
so much
that.
for the time.
What you've created here is really something special. Yeah, it's very cool, and it inspires me. So
cool.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you, Rich.
Cheers.
Cool.